Now that you've had a chance to take a look at the outside of this device, the hardware parts, let's start taking a look under the hood. We'll go through some of the basic settings during this settings part 1 introduction to how to manage the iPad and some of the things that are on it. All the settings that we're going to talk about in this class are typically found in this section right here, settings. Once we have those settings, or once you know how to use or get into these settings, you have a wealth of power at your fingertips. In fact, I'm just going to use my fingertip, poke that, and show you what the settings area looks like. Once you're in settings, it should look a little bit like this, where you have a list of all the different things you can do down the left-hand side, and then every time I activate one of those, the right-hand side morphs and changes so that you can adjust all the settings that have to do with this topic. For instance, if I'm in notifications here, I have notifications for all these different apps. If I want to go to my cellular data, it'll be right here. If you do not have a cellular data or cellular iPad, don't panic. You probably don't even have a cellular data section. So no worries. And obviously, some of the things that you're going to notice as you go through here is the iPad, again, is smart. It learns from what you have installed on your iPad, so that if you have different things installed on your iPad, especially when you get down here to this section, you're going to have a lot less options for things to do in your settings than I may have, or you may have more options depending on what apps you have installed on your iPad. But I'm going to take you through some of the basics of the settings, this top section up here, in this first of a 2-part setting series. Airplane mode is just that. It turns on or off your data going in and out of your iPad so that you can keep you and all the other passengers on an airplane safe from crashing. Wi-Fi right here is the section where you're going to latch onto a SSID or find an access point that you can jump onto, whether you're at McDonald's or at your school or at home. You should identify or find some of those networks that you can join. Once you're in there, you can obviously turn your Wi-Fi off if you so desire, or you can join one of these networks, and when they have the lock button, that means that there's a password involved. If they don't, it's free to access. But be careful with some of those, because you want to make sure that it's a secure setting that you're jumping through that socket and getting on the internet with. One of the next things, the simplest things to understand potentially, would be the cellular data on and off. But like I said, if you don't have cellular data, it's not really going to matter to you. If you do have the cellular data, this is where you can set up your account and you can decide which version or which plan you want to go with. And this is a month-to-month basis. This is not a yearly contract. But you have to decide what's right for you and sign up with your Apple ID account. Let's pop back up here now and just take a look at location services. Location services are more than what you think. Location services do have to do with your GPS triangulation here in the world and whether or not this allows those GPS signals to be sent to and from your iPad so that it can identify whether you're downtown or on the outskirts of town or at your house or at your work. But it also has to do with whether or not a certain app is allowed to access the hard drive on your iPad. For instance, if I take and I turn my camera off, the location services will no longer timestamp and stamp with the GPS location on my images where I was at the time. But if you use something like Evernote and you turn location services off, it will do that, but it will also disallow you from being able to access any of your camera roll, in other words, any of your images, to insert into Evernote, because it turns off that app's ability to access the hard drive. So just be careful when you're thinking about location services. You'll notice every time you install an app, it's going to ask you, if it is involved with it at least, it's going to ask you, can location services access your hard drive or enable location services? And that's your preference at that point. But the nice part is, even if you choose yes or no when you're installing that app, you have every right to come back into the settings here and turn them on or off independently. You can even turn your entire location services off altogether if you want to be very private for a little while. The next one that I want to go through is notifications. Notifications comes in a series of major options for notifying you. One is called badges, One is called sounds, banners, and then there's also the alerts. And if you take a look at that, if I don't poke that haphazardly by accident again, you'll notice, let's take a look at NG Magazine here. I just touched the app itself, or the app reference itself for NG Magazine like this, and it brings me to another set of options that I have. Notifications is another thing that the app will ask you about when you first install it. It will say, can this app use notifications? Well, you can certainly say yes or no and then turn it on or off later like this. If you want to turn notifications off for your app altogether, you flip the little toggle switch at the very top to off, or you can manage the individual parts of the notifications. For instance, sound notifications really bother me. They irritate me, kind of like when that cell phone went off just a second ago and you could hear it and it bothered everybody. But now I can turn the sound off on this app. This app will no longer go bling or boom or make some stupid sound when I'm in a meeting or out with friends or what have you. However, the badges app notification will stay on. And by badges, let me show you what I mean. Badges are these things right here. There's a little tiny red circle or oval that indicates something needs to be done with this app. For instance, under settings here, there's probably one update that I have to do. In the App Store, there are 81 updates to my apps. And if I went to my mail account, you might see that I have like 57 or 153 unread emails on that badge. That's a badge. Let's go back into notifications and talk a little bit about some of the other notifications that might arise. Banners are the little things that pop up along the top up here of your iPad. So if you've got calendar events or some other things, sometimes they jump up into the banner section up here. And then the straight up alerts are some of the most annoying things, but sometimes they're the most pertinent. They're the ones that jump up on your screen as a brand new dialog box right in the middle of your screen, and you have to decide whether you want to dismiss, cancel, or execute something in that notification. Back out of here, and you can see I have notification options for all of these. The nice part is, like I keep saying, you can manage individual levels of each of these apps and decide what kind of notifications you want to or don't want to receive. The very last thing that I want to take you through in settings part 1 is your mail and contacts. It's a little ways down here. You may have to scroll. It's just underneath the iCloud typically, and if I click on that, you'll notice I have a whole bunch of settings in here. In order to set up your mail, you'll have to come in here, or you can click your mail icon for the very first time and it will walk you through setting up your mail if you have never done it before. But as you can see in mine, I already have my Gmail account set up. The beautiful part about iPads are that you can ingest multiple different email accounts. So you can ingest your school email account, your Gmail, some other personal email. You can even do your siblings or your spouse's email and have it all come down to one place. Let's say you're on vacation and you and your whole family want to check your email from a one-stop shop. You can set that up here in the Mail and Contacts account. If you want to add another email account or another account here, you hit Account and you get to pick from one of these major options. This is the same page that you'll see if you access your Mail app for the very first time or your Calendar app for the very first time. If you're using one of these, it's extremely easy. So if your school uses an Exchange account or your business uses a Gmail account, you're golden. If you have something else, it's still not that terrible, but you may need to get a little help from an IT service provider at your location to find out possibly what your server name is or any of the other POP 3 issues that you may need to work around. Let's just access Yahoo quickly here. Typically, if you have something like a Yahoo or Gmail account, it's this easy. You just type in your name. This is any name you want to give this email account. It doesn't even have to be associated with that email account necessarily. Just something for you to easily recognize that later on. So you might want to type in Jane's Yahoo account or something like that to remind yourself what account that is. But then you just type in your Yahoo address. So for instance, mine might be something like this. Before you at yahoo.com. And then you type in whatever your password is to get into that email account when you're on the internet, and you type that in, and then you hit the next button, and it's going to ask you if you want to sync your mail, your contacts, and your calendars. I'll show you what I mean. So now I've properly typed in my username and password for my Yahoo account, and it's asking me, like I said, if I want to sync my mail, sync my contacts, calendars, reminders, and notes. As you can see, I have notes turned off, and typically I turn off most things, for instance, like calendars and even contacts, because all of my contact information, all my calendar information is actually done through my school. And so when I do my personal accounts, the only thing I really want to sync is my mail, so that my mail comes into my mail app, but nothing else. So then I would just hit save, and I would be good to go. After it's done, you can see it's been added here. So now I have my Gmail and my Yahoo account. If I don't poke that, I have my Gmail and my Yahoo account. And if I want to add a third, fourth, fifth, or sixth, I just keep hitting the add account section. The fetch new data right here has to do with how often do you want your iPad, your mail app, to jump out to the internet and pull in that new information about new emails, synced up emails, things that you've archived, what have you. And so this is just done manually, which means I have to actually hit the sync button when I'm in the mail app. If I want it to happen every 15 minutes very often, so it's happening in the background even when I'm not touching anything, just click on that. And there are even advanced settings in here if you want. If you don't want anything pushed back and forth from the internet at all, you want that completely shut down, you would just flip the switch on this little push notification. Push notifications, which sometimes you're warned about on iPads, are things that are pushed from the internet to your iPad or in reverse. In other words, just data or syncing things up. Jump back to the contacts up here. By the way, if you didn't notice or didn't realize, in order to bop back and forth in the settings here, there's usually a little tab up here. Once you've dug deep down into some settings, you can get back to where you were by hitting that little tab. If I go down here, these are just settings for my mail. If I want to show the 50 most recent emails in my list, you can change that to be 25 or 200, whatever. You can even set your preview, because once you're in your mail, you'll have your email down the left-hand side, but then a preview of each email as you click on it will appear over on the right-hand side. You can even change labeling, and you can change whether or not you want it to ask you before deleting. In other words, are you smart enough, or are you going to remember that you deleted this thing? You can turn that off. Load remote images. I think most of the rest of these things you can figure out yourselves. Right here, if you always want to blind copy yourself to make sure that you have evidence that you sent out an email, if you're in a profession where you just always like to make sure you have that redundancy, that's something you could turn on. One of the best things you can do now while you're in here is change your signature so that it's more relevant for you as the person sending from the iPad. In other words, you can type in Jane Swift from such and such school district and put your email address, your fax number, all of those things down at the bottom of your email every single time you send out. One of the things is you will notice some people have sent from my mobile device, sent from my iPad, and you can see it's set up here generically to say sent from my iPad. That may seem a little tawdy, or it may even seem a little bit silly to have in there, but proper etiquette kind of dictates that it's nice to have at the bottom, because people are more forgiving when you're emailing from a mobile device. If you have spelling errors or you miss punctuation, if you say that it's sent from the iPad or from your mobile device, people typically are a little more forgiving. So just keep that in mind as you change your signature settings. The last few things are down here at the bottom. These have to do with calendars, so if you have no calendars turned on, these really don't mean a thing. However, if you sync up your contacts and your calendars, you may want to switch up how often they sync, how they sync, the display orders, and all the rest of those things. That ends the basics, or the getting started part one of iPad settings. To get out, always just hit the home button and you'll land right back here with all of your brand new settings.